in one's inmost consciousness is something no combination of the physical organs is capable of expressing in any way adequate to the experience. But as when searching for an object in the dark one has to rely on a lantern, meaning is after all to be gathered by means of words, at least it is to be thus oriented. The understanding of the relation thus existing between Ruta and Artha will be necessary when we wish to know the nature of the inner perception. This relation between words and meaning, or between syllables and reality, or between teaching and truth, is like that between the finger and the moon. The finger is needed to point out the moon, but it ought not to be taken for the latter. The same disastrous result follows from regarding Akshara or Ruta or Dasena as the reality itself. Those who are not able to take their eyes away from the fingertip will never realize the ultimate truth of things. It is again like feeding the baby with uncooked food, it will be too late to resuscitate it when it has succumbed to the mother's unwise treatment. Those trained in the Buddhist doctrine ought to be quite discriminating in this respect. Naturally, we would not know what the teaching of the Buddha was if we had had no communication in words. Words were very much needed, but when there is no correspondence between words and meaning, the teaching itself will lose its sense. The Lankavatara thus reiterates throughout the text that the Tathagata never teaches the Dharma fallen into mere talk, and it was for this reason that it was preached by the Buddha and other teachers of the Dharma that the Tathagata had not uttered a word in answer or in discourse during his lifetime between his enlightenment and the nirvana. The idea is, do not cling to words. Words are to be treated like the lunar reflection in water as far as they are related in meaning. The reflection is there, though the moon itself has not entered into the water. Nor is it to be considered as standing in no relation to the water, because the latter has something in it to reflect the moon. Only let us not fall into the habit of superficially taking mere words for real meaning. This is the warning of the Lankavatara. Disastrous complications arising from discrimination. The habit of regarding words as completely and adequately expressing all that can be found there comes from another habit of ours, which is, in the terminology of the Lankavatara, our wrong discrimination or interpretation of the aspect of existence which may be designated as individuation. Cheda-lakshana. When this aspect is well understood so that we shall no more be misled by wrong interpretation, we are able to get into a state of self-realization. Individuation means to separate one object from another, and taking these separated, particular objects for final substances, to cling to this notion and thereby to keep up the evil desires and passions burning all the time. According to the Sutra, this wrong interpretation takes place in regard to several categories of thought and being, such as speech, describable objects of thought, appearances, material wealth, substance, causal relations, definite philosophical views, reasonings as to the existence of an ego, coming into existence, not coming into existence, dependence and bondage and release. Point 2. Logically considered, this kind of classification is baffling. But when we survey the Indian background which stimulated the Buddhist philosopher to speculate on such conglomerate subjects, we can readily enter into its spirit. For Buddhists, in fact for all Indian philosophers, there are no abstract problems of philosophy to be solved from a purely intellectual point of view. They are always tinged with religious sentiment, they have always some bearings on the most important practical question of life, which is how to get spiritual freedom. All the thinking carried on in the Sutra, therefore, has always this question in view, and naturally those statements above referred to are to be explained according to the general trend of Buddhist thought. The wrong consideration about speech creates an attachment to musical or literary productions which are not always spiritually enhancing, and these are to be avoided. Objects of thought are describable and therefore are determinable, but the content of the inner perception forming the central theme of the Lankavatara is not subject to this limitation, and if one gets a wrong idea here, there will be no salvation for him, as he takes a thing indescribable and inexpressible for a thing to be seen, to be touched, and to be possessed. Things describable have no permanency and consequently no spiritual value, but we are liable to judge them wrongly and get firmly attached to them. We are in this respect like those who fancy watery appearances in the desert to be a real sheet of water. This faulty judgment may extend indefinitely over all appearances, and that the result will be ruinous goes without saying. Hence this warning. Attachment to material wealth or property is another case of false judgment as to appearance. Substance means in the Lankavatara a concrete individual object, a residue after the last analysis. And the adherents of the substance theory maintain that there are really such things outside the mind. Owing to this misjudgment, the way to self-realization is blocked. Errors of causal relation refer to the ideas of to be and not to be, which are considered real inasmuch as they make it possible to establish causal relationship between things about us. But this idea of causality ought not to lead us to a first cause or a primary being from which all things derive their reality. As we know, Buddhist philosophy denies the existence of a first cause as such. The ideas of Sat and Asat are only relative and have no substantial existence besides being so named. We next come to such philosophical views as were entertained by different schools of thought at the time of the Lankavatara. According to which such categories as to be and not to be, as oneness and otherness, or as bothness and not bothness, are actualities and for that reason to be adhered to. This is, however, wrong and is sure to lead one away from the inner realization of the truth. Reasoning is concerned with the notion of the ego. When this is thought to be a reality, our spiritual development stops short. The Lankavatara, loyal to the traditional view of Buddhist philosophy, refuses to countenance the theory of ego substance, which may be regarded as a corollary to the general substance theory. The notion of coming into existence is related to that of causality. When certain causes and conditions are matured, people think something comes into actual existence and continues to exist until the causes and conditions cease to operate. For coming into existence and vanishing from it are both real facts as much as is the general law of causation. The no-birth view of things, on the contrary, argues that nothing has ever been brought into existence through causal relations, but that things are what they are prior to the operation of the law of causation. And this is one of the characteristic views of the Lankavatara, and a special treatment of the subject appears below. Dependence and bondage are similar ideas. The relation between metal and wire is dependence, while a man tied with a cord is in bondage, from which he can later be released when the cord is broken. All such relations when conceived as real and permanent become dangerous to the spiritual growth of a true Buddhist, that is, of a bodhisattva. Words and meaning, therefore, are to be separated, as the former generally fail to give us an exact idea of the object described with them. They are of course indicative, suggesting where to look for the meaning. Numerous indeed are close attachments a man makes to things and relations on account of a wrong understanding of their true nature and value. And, owing to these mistaken attachments, he wraps himself like a silkworm in a cocoon, binding tight not only himself but others. Imagining things where they are not, or not perceiving them where they are, men are addicted to evil desires and passions. Let them learn to look into reality, yathabhutam, for to do this is to break through the net of wrong judgment and false imagination and to attain the inward perception which is emancipation. The meaning of yathabhutam and maya. To understand the world and selfhood as they really are, this is seeing yathabhutam, one of the great trumpet calls ringing through both Mahayana and Hinayana literature. But to know exactly what yathabhutam means is the problem, for it does not allow of any definite description. The problem is to be settled only by appealing to experience, i.e., to direct perception when the truth has been grasped as such. In this respect Buddhist terminology is often graphic and full of power. Think of such terms as tathata, i.e., suchness or thusness, tattvam, or satya, which are used to designate the content of the inner perception. This seeing, yathabhutam, constitutes the mystical element of all religion. And if one is effectively inclined, tat will have to be taken in faith. But when the intellectual claim predominates, Tat will have to be perceived with the noble eye of wisdom and not by a divine or human eye. The world seen through a divine or human eye is a world of Maya, but one disclosed to the prajna is the real one. Therefore, logically speaking, Maya is not a quality objectively attached to the world, it is not inherent in it, it rather belongs to the subject. As indeed the idealistic Mahayana does not admit the existence of an externa world, whatever qualities we ordinarily think as belonging to the latter are creations or constructions of our own mind. But if we allow ourselves to be guided by the discriminating imagination, the world must be said to have in itself something of the nature of Maya. For its impermanence is patent to us all, it appears and disappears like lightning, having no self-substance in it. To say that this is an evanescent world is to say that it is always becoming, never in a state of being, that is, in constant flux as an ancient philosopher describes it. We must, however, be most careful not to be carried away by the ordinary method of interpreting the world and designate its transiency or constant becoming in Mahayanist terminology. This is strongly colored with an idealistic tinge, and to apply it in an objective realistic sense will be quite misleading. When the world is said to be like Maya, it is to be understood subjectively, and not objectively. Such objective terms as transiency or a flux of becoming presuppose realism, and are not, strictly speaking, in harmony with the absolutely idealistic standpoint adopted by Mahayanists. So with the conception of sunyata, we must bear in mind the fact that the term is not to be found in a logician's dictionary, nor in one containing realistic terms only. For it is the word coined by the possessor of the Prajanakakshas when he has reviewed the world as I look at a sheet of paper before me this very moment. By him the world is perceived yathabhutam stripped of all its logical predicates and also its so-called objective trappings. The world thus appearing in its nakedness has been designated empty, by the Mahayanists. It is in this sense, therefore, that it can be said there is nothing substantial in the world, nothing which has individuality, nothing which can be grasped. And that it slips through the hands, one predicate disappearing after another, so that it cannot be designated as being, nor by its opposite, not being. No term that admits of an antithesis can be applied to the world, as it is beyond the logic of opposites. To mention some such terms of antithesis used frequently in the Lankavatara. They are asti and nasti, or sat and asat, saphoto and ukita, svalaksha and samanyalakshajana, lakshya and laksha. Fa. Grahaya and grahaka. Sarhasara and nirvarna, utpada and nara, kritaka and akritaka, bahayan and adhyatarnika, anya and ananya, anikata and ada, abhaya and nobhaya, nitya and anitya, buddhaya and bodhavya, etc. Before one term definitely fixes its quality, it runs over to the other alternative. The Lankavatara, therefore, declares that the world as it is does not fall within the four propositions or points, and in the first chapter even 108 negations are enumerated. The most truthful description of the state of things as we experience in this world of particulars, will be, from the Buddhist way of thinking, to compare it with Maya as created by the magician. Making use of whatever objects a man chooses, he makes a variety of phantom creatures which appear to the spectators as real and substantial. But in this neither the magician nor the objects fancifully created are at fault. The fault lies with the spectators who make erroneous judgments permitting things where they are not. The Sutra gives further analogical proofs to impress upon us the truth of the Maya conception or that of sunyata. That a picture is seen as if it really had three dimensions, that a bedimmed eye imagines a hairnet. That a circle traced out by a firebrand in quick motion is considered real. That a bubble is taken for a crystal ball. And further, that the reflection of a tree in a lake, an image in the mirror, an echo reverberating through the valley, a mirage in the spring field, and the wooden man operated by a goblin, that each of these objects is regarded as an actuality, is due to the error of judgment on the part of an unenlightened mind, which, being placed under the permeating memory influence of past thoughts and desires, is self-incapacitated from looking into the truth of the matter. However, we must not take them for absolute illusions, for they are there and yet they are not there, so that the category of existence fails to be applied here. From the dualistic point of view, we feel inclined to interpret these terms objectively as denoting the idea of mere transiency or unreality. But when the whole trend of Buddhist thought is understood, we know that these similes are meant to describe a state of things, to which such logical conceptions as sat and asat, etc., are inapplicable, but which must be directly experienced in the inmost consciousness with the understanding of reality as it is. The Lankavatara says, 1. The sky, or space, the hare's horns, and a barren woman's child. They are not, only talked of. So are things discriminated. And the totality of causes and conditions, the ignorant imagine birth. Not knowing this reason, they go astray in the triple world. This may seem to mean all things are mere names, their existence is not more than a matter of subjective discrimination. To think that things are really born, stay, and disappear in the system of causes and effects, is an illusion. All these realities, so-called, have no objective validity. And, therefore, the world is altogether empty, void, unreal, and a mass of nothingness. To think this way, however, is not the position of the Mahayanist. What he wants us to do is that we should have a revulsion of the whole system of mentality and get a new point of view where we may survey the world. Yathabhutam Sutra therefore states a little further down that the difference between the wise and the ignorant is that the former are free from the viparyasa, while the latter are not. Viparyasa literally means inversion or error. It means imagining things as they are not, taking error for truth. The wise, not hampered by this imagination, see that the world is like Maya and has no reality, but at the same time they know that it is there, that it is not pure nothingness. Why? Because they have gone beyond the relativism of being and non-being. The waters of the Ganges are not visible to the Preta, but since other people see them they cannot be said to be non-existent. In a similar way, the wise have a correct view of things, for they are free from errors in their perception of an objective world, which exists only in relation to their own mind. An objective world is really all error in so far as it is discriminated as existing externally and individually. Or we may say that an externa particularized world is an illusion as long as the ignorant are unable to break through the fetters of vikalpa, wrong discrimination. Whereas to the wise the phenomenal world is true in its suchness. What, therefore, is an error to one is truth to the other, because the latter is entirely free from all forms of discrimination. To repeat, the objective world is an error, there is nothing real about it, it is Maya, it is empty. But this does not mean that it is altogether non-entity and merely a vast expanse of vacuity. The world, even if it is error, is there to the wise as well as to the ignorant. But the wise know that it is of an elusive nature, and in this cognition they are neither perverted nor unperverted. They just see it in reality, they perceive the world as it truly is. And while they do this, the world, or what is regarded as such by the ignorant, is eternal and beyond the reach of every possible dualistic category. It is in this sense that the Lankavatara declares Bhaitranti, Saphota, Bhaitrantis Tattvam, this world of error is eternity itself, truth itself. If he wise, as the Sutra states, cherish even an incipient stirring of thoughts rooted in discrimination or particularization of forms and signs, they are far from the reality and thought of supreme wisdom, and the wise fall into the rank of the ignorant. It, however, is to be remembered that the existence of this erroneous and confusing world makes it possible for the wise to cause a revulsion in their minds and awaken their supreme wisdom from the narcotic effect of evil memory accumulated since time immemorial. This narcotic effect manifested in so many aspects of consciousness as citta, manas, manovijnana, etc. causes it to differentiate reality as in a dream into subjects and successive appearances, and thus accepting them as real and final to cling to them as to the truth. But, realizing the elusive nature of these intellectual discriminations, the wise rise above them and seeing them as errors transmute falsehood into truth, phantasm into reality. And, on account of this realization, they know that what confront them is neither reality as imagined by the ignorant nor unreality as inferred by the unreflecting. The world is such as it is neither existence nor non-existence, no such predicates are applicable to it, and for this reason what is to be termed an error. For the ignorant is tathata for the wise. Though this statement sounds paradoxical or even irrational, the position of the Lankavatara will readily be comprehended when we abandon our dualistic standpoint and see the world yathabhutam, from its aspect of eternity. So we have. The wise do not see the erroneous world, nor is there any reality in the midst of it. But, since the erroneous world is reality, there is reality in the midst of it. If, by abandoning all that is of the erroneous world, something is to rise, this something is an error, like the cataract which has not yet been cleared off the eye. In short, all such apparent paradoxes are designed to adjust our thoughts yathabhutam to the actuality of existence, with which no ordinary rules of logic are compatible. To say, it is eternalism, to say that it is not is nihilism. And the object of Buddhist reasoning is to avoid both of these two antithetic views. Though not necessarily attempting to establish idealistic monism, but to lead us to the way of experiencing it in its inwardness as well as in its totality. O Lord of Luddaka, reads the Sutra, he who sees thus sees rightly. If seen otherwise, it is carrying on discrimination, because here is discrimination which leads to dualism. It is like seeing one's own face in water. Or like seeing one's own shadow in the moonlight or by the lantern, or listening to an echo of one's own voice in the valley, wherein discrimination takes place leading to attachment. In like manner, to separate dharma from adharma is only due to discrimination, and on account of this one finds it impossible to do away with the distinction, thereby creating all forms of falsehood. One is thus unable